Welcome to the Africa Echoes, the channel with the history of Africa. Our story is created for education and cultural awareness purposes only, shared to educate and keep our heritage alive. Before there were kings, before the pyramids touched the sky, before the name Egypt ever existed, there was a river. A long, winding vein of life that carved its way through a vast, merciless desert, the Nile. It was the heart of a land that would become legend. But at first, it was only wilderness. A place of stone, dust, and silence, waiting to be awakened. Tens of thousands of years ago, long before any monument was built, humans roamed these lands as hunters and gatherers. They moved with the seasons, following animals, chasing water, leaving only footprints in the sand. The Sahara wasn't always a desert. In those early days, it was alive, green, lush, filled with lakes and grasslands. Herds of wild cattle grazed, and early humans found food, shelter, and purpose. But time changed everything. The rains began to fade. The land dried up. And slowly, the people moved toward the river. That river, the Nile, became their lifeline. Here, they found something new: stability. They began to stay, to plant, to dream. Every year, the Nile flooded, not as a curse, but as a miracle. It spilled its waters over the land, leaving behind rich, black soil, Kemet, the Black Land, as it would later be called. And so, life began to bloom along its banks. People learned to farm. They planted wheat and barley. They raised cattle and goats. They built homes from mud and straw, and soon villages began to rise, tiny sparks of civilization flickering in the desert's vast silence. Fishing boats floated down the Nile. Clay pots were molded by hand. Stories were painted on cave walls, the first whispers of what would become Egyptian art. These people didn't yet call themselves Egyptians. They had no kings, no pyramids, no gods carved in stone. But they were laying the foundation, the slow, patient birth of one of history's greatest civilizations. Even in the Stone Age, these early Nile dwellers were not just survivors, they were thinkers, dreamers, and believers. They looked at the sky and saw eternity. They watched the sun rise and fall and felt something divine. They saw death, but they also believed in what came after. In shallow graves, they buried their dead with care, tools, beads, and food for the journey beyond. This showed a remarkable truth: even in their earliest days, Egyptians believed that life never truly ended. It was this belief, that death was only a doorway, that would one day shape their temples, their gods, their pyramids, and their understanding of the universe itself. As the centuries passed, the Nile's people grew more organized. Villages became communities. Communities became regions. Two lands began to form: Upper Egypt, in the south where the river cuts through narrow valleys, and Lower Egypt, in the wide, fertile delta of the north. These two lands developed their own customs, leaders, and symbols. Upper Egypt's people wore the white crown, Lower Egypt's wore the red. They traded with one another, but they also competed, two halves of a single body, destined one day to unite. But that day was still far off. For now, Egypt was a land of tribes, chiefs, and farmers, connected by the river, divided by ambition. Traditions in the making. The Stone Age Egyptians were inventors in spirit, even before the rise of writing or recorded history. They learned to shape stone into tools sharper than bone. They carved fish hooks, knives, and arrows. They wove baskets from reeds and built boats that glided on the Nile's calm surface. Music was born here too, the hum of flutes made from bird bones, the rhythm of hands beating against stretched animal skins. They danced under the moon to celebrate the floods and sang to the river as if it were a god. And maybe it was. Because for them, everything sacred came from the Nile: food, life, and hope. They would one day call it Hapi, the god of the river's bounty. This reverence for nature, the river, the sun, the animals, became the roots of Egyptian spirituality. Every stone and ripple of water carried meaning. Then, slowly, power began to take shape. Some villages grew stronger than others. Trade routes expanded. Leaders emerged, men and women who could protect, organize, and command. They built larger settlements, places like Merimd, Badari, and Nakata, the earliest centers of what would become Egyptian culture. Pottery grew more intricate. Art began to tell stories. People wore ornaments, not just for beauty, but for identity. The social fabric was forming, layered, structured, alive. And as these small kingdoms thrived, another force began to whisper in the wind: unification. Because across the river, in the next valley, another leader was rising, with his own banners, his own people, and his own dreams of ruling the two lands. By around 3100 BCE, Egypt was no longer just a scattering of settlements. It was a mosaic of kingdoms, proud, ambitious, restless. Somewhere in the southern valleys, a powerful ruler was preparing to do what no one had done before: bring all of Egypt under one crown. He would go to war, not for conquest alone, but to unite a civilization, to turn the gifts of the Nile into a single destiny. His name would echo for millennia. Some would call him Narmer. Others, Menes, the first pharaoh. But that is a story for another time. As the sun set over the Nile for the 1000th time, the people of the river prepared for another flood, unaware that history itself was about to change. The drums of unification were beginning to beat in the south. The age of tribes was ending. The age of kings was about to begin. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more African history.